The desert highway stretched endlessly under the scorching Arizona sun when Jake Razor Morrison spotted the commotion ahead. A group of teenagers had cornered a scrawny donkey by the roadside, throwing rocks and laughing as the terrified animal cowered against a broken fence. To everyone else, it looked like worthless livestock left to die. But Jake wasn't everyone else. 20 years ago, before the leather jacket and the Harley, Jake had been Captain Morrison, Army Special Forces, specializing in search and rescue operations in Afghanistan. He'd saved more lives than he cared to count, both human and animal. These kids saw a washed-up biker interfering with their cruel fun. They had no idea they were dealing with a man trained to read situations others missed. As Jake approached the trembling donkey, something caught his eye, a weathered piece of paper tied to its makeshift halter. The message, scrawled in desperate handwriting, made his blood run cold. This wasn't just animal abuse. This was something far more sinister. The growl of Jake's Harley cut through the desert air as he downshifted. The engine's rumble causing the teenagers to pause mid-throw. 4 kids, maybe 16 or 17, their faces flushed with the particular brand of cruelty that came from boredom and too much time on their hands. The donkey, a small grey creature with ribs showing through its dull coat, pressed itself against the weathered fence posts, its dark eyes wide with terror. Jake killed the engine and swung his leg over the bike, his boots hitting the gravel with purpose. At 6'2", with arms covered in military tattoos, he cut an imposing figure even without trying. The teenagers straightened, suddenly less confident in their afternoon entertainment. "You boys lost?" Jake's voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made smart people step back. Unfortunately, teenagers weren't always smart people. The apparent leader, a lanky kid with sun-bleached hair, hefted another rock. "Just having some fun, old man. Keep riding." Jake took 3 measured steps forward, and something in his movement, the controlled precision of someone who'd spent years in hostile territory, made the other 3 boys take an involuntary step back. The leader, however, was too proud or too stupid to read the warning signs. This piece of crap was just standing here, probably diseased. "We're doing everyone a favor. Put the rock down." Jake's tone hadn't changed, but the temperature around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. The kid's arm cocked back, ready to throw, when Jake moved. 20 years of civilian life hadn't dulled the reflexes honed in mountain villages and desert compounds. One moment Jake was standing 10 feet away, the next he had the teenager's wrist in a grip that made the boy's eyes water and the rock tumble harmlessly to the ground. "I said put it down." Jake released the wrist and stepped back, watching as the kid rubbed the circulation back into his hand. "All of you, walk away." This time, they didn't argue. The leader muttered something about crazy bikers, but they were already backing toward their beat-up sedan, parked 50 yards down the road. Within minutes, Jake watched their taillights disappear toward Phoenix, leaving only the whisper of desert wind and the donkey's labored breathing. Jake approached the animal slowly, hands visible, speaking in the low, calm voice he'd once used to coax traumatized children from bombed-out buildings. "Easy there, friend. Nobody's going to hurt you now." The donkey's ears twitched forward, and Jake could see intelligence in those dark eyes. Not the dull acceptance he'd expected, but something sharper, alert, as if the animal had been waiting for someone to notice more than its obvious suffering. That's when Jake saw the paper clearly for the first time. Tied to the frayed rope serving as a halter was a piece of notebook paper, folded and refolded, the edges soft with handling. Jake worked it free with gentle fingers, his soldier's training making him automatically scan the horizon for threats before unfolding the message. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. A woman's hand, he thought, and written in what looked like ballpoint pen that had been running out of ink. "If you find Dusty, please call 602-555-7847. My name is Maria Santos. They took my children, Emma 8 and Carlos 6. Said I had 72 hours to bring them what they wanted, or I'd never see them again. I don't have what they want. Dusty was the only witness. Please. He saw where they took my babies. Please help us." They said if I called police, My children would disappear forever. Dusty knows he was there. Please. Below the message was a crude map, a few lines that might represent roads, an X marking a location, and what looked like a building sketch. Jake felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the same feeling he'd carried through mountains and villages where children's lives hung in the balance. He looked at the donkey, Dusty, who was now watching him with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. "Well, partner," Jake said, carefully folding the note and slipping it into his jacket pocket. "Looks like we've got work to do." "Easy there, buddy," Marcus murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper. The donkey's dark eyes held a wariness that reminded him too much of his own reflection. Both of them had learned not to trust easily. As he worked to free the animal from the makeshift harness the kids had rigged, his fingers brushed against something unusual, a small piece of paper, folded tight and wedged beneath the rope around the donkey's neck. Marcus frowned, carefully extracting it, while the donkey stood perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of the moment. The paper was weathered but legible, written in a woman's desperate handwriting. "Please help." They took Tommy. "If you find Jasper, look for the blue house past Miller's Crossing. Tell them Sarah sent you. Time is running out." Marcus read it twice, his jaw tightening with each word. He'd seen plenty of human cruelty in his 43 years, in the army, in prison, in the grey spaces between law and justice where he'd spent most of his adult life. But something about this note, this plea from a stranger, cut through his usual armour of indifference. The donkey, Jasper, apparently, nudged his shoulder with a wet nose, as if urging him to action. Marcus folded the note and slipped it into his leather jacket pocket. He had two choices: mind his own business like he always did, or get involved in what looked like serious trouble. The smart play was obvious. 20 minutes later, he was loading Jasper into the horse trailer he'd borrowed from old Pete at the gas station, using a story about finding livestock on the highway. Pete hadn't asked questions. Around here, people minded their own business, which was exactly why Marcus had settled in this corner of nowhere after his release. The drive to Miller's Crossing took an hour on winding back roads. Marcus knew the area vaguely. It was even more isolated than his own place, where people went when they wanted to disappear completely. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he began to question his decision. This wasn't his problem. He had enough ghosts without adding new ones. But the note in his pocket seemed to pulse with urgency, and Jasper's presence in the trailer behind him felt like a responsibility he couldn't shake. Miller's Crossing turned out to be 3 buildings and a broken streetlight. Past it, exactly as described, sat a small blue house with peeling paint and windows that glowed yellow in the gathering darkness. Marcus parked his truck and trailer 100 yards away, studying the scene with the tactical awareness that prison and combat had burned into his brain. The house looked normal enough, but something felt off. No car in the driveway, no signs of life except for those lit windows. And there, tire tracks in the dirt, recent ones, leading away from the house toward the desert. Marcus approached on foot, leaving Jasper in the trailer. His hand instinctively moved to the knife on his belt, muscle memory from years of expecting trouble. The front door was slightly ajar, moving gently in the desert breeze. Inside, the house told a story of interrupted life. A woman's purse dumped on the kitchen table, contents scattered. Children's drawings still taped to the refrigerator, bright crayon smiles that made Marcus's chest tighten, and on the coffee table, more papers, photographs actually. School pictures of children, different ages, different schools. Someone had written dates on the back of each photo. The most recent was just 3 days ago. A sound from the back of the house made him freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Marcus drew his knife and moved toward the hallway, every sense on high alert. The footsteps stopped. "Who's there?" a woman's voice called out, shaky but defiant. "I've got a gun." "Sarah?" Marcus called back. "I found Jasper. And your note." Silence stretched between them like a held breath. Then the woman appeared at the end of the hallway, 30-something, blonde hair tangled, eyes red from crying but alert with desperate hope. "You found him? Is he okay?" She clutched a baseball bat, not a gun. "Did you bring him back?" "He's outside. Safe." Marcus kept his knife low but ready. "Your note mentioned Tommy." And that time was running out. Sarah's face crumpled with relief and renewed anguish. "My son. They took my son, and I don't know why, and the police won't listen because of who I am, what I used to do." She gestured at the photographs. "But it's not just Tommy. There are others, and I think I know where they're taking them." The vet's office smelled like disinfectant and fear. Jake sat in the cramped waiting room, watching the donkey, who he'd started calling Gus, nibble at some hay through the transport carrier's slats. The animal seemed calmer now, though his eyes still held that haunted look Jake recognized all too well. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the back room, her scrubs bearing testament to a long day. She was younger than Jake expected, maybe 35, with kind eyes that reminded him of his sister before the drugs took her. "Let's take a look at your friend," she said, kneeling beside the carrier. Her hands moved with practiced gentleness as she examined Gus, checking the cuts and bruises those teenage psychopaths had inflicted. "He's dehydrated and malnourished, but nothing that won't heal with proper care." Jake watched her work, noting how the donkey seemed to trust her immediately. Animals always knew, he'd learned. They could sense who meant harm and who didn't. "You planning to keep him?" Dr. Chen asked, preparing a syringe with antibiotics. "Hadn't thought that far ahead." Jake pulled out his cigarettes, then remembered where he was and put them away. "Just couldn't leave him there." "I get that." She administered the shot with quick efficiency. Most people would have driven by. Most people don't know what it's like to be helpless while someone hurts you. The words came out harsher than he intended, and Dr. Chen looked up at him with new understanding. She didn't push, just nodded and continued her examination. While she worked, Jake's mind drifted to the note in his pocket. The paper felt heavier than it should, weighted with desperation and secrets. He'd tried to convince himself it was nothing, maybe some kid's idea of a prank or creative writing assignment. But the handwriting told a different story. It shook with genuine terror. "There's something else," Jake said finally. "Found this attached to his collar." He handed over the note, watching Dr. Chen's expression change as she read. Her professional composure cracked just slightly. This is about missing children." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You need to take this to the police." "Yeah, that's what I figured." But even as he said it, Jake felt that familiar distrust of authority gnawing at him. Cops in his experience fell into two categories: the ones who didn't give a damn about people like him, and the ones who actively made life worse. Dr. Chen finished cleaning Gus's wounds and stepped back. "He'll need to stay here overnight for observation. The dehydration is more serious than it looks." Jake nodded, surprised by the pang of worry that shot through him. When had he gotten attached to the stubborn little animal? "Dr. Chen," he said as she prepared to leave. "This note, you ever heard anything about missing kids around here?" She hesitated, glancing toward the front desk where her receptionist was busy with paperwork. "There've been rumors. Nothing concrete, but—" She lowered her voice. "I had a woman bring in an injured cat about 2 weeks ago. She was frantic, kept talking about how her daughter had disappeared and the police weren't doing enough. Said there were other families, other missing children." "What was her name?" "I can't give out patient information, you know that." "But—" Dr. Chen glanced around again, then made a decision. "Maria Santos, lives over on Cypress Street." The woman was desperate, talking to anyone who'd listen. Jake memorized the name, already planning his next move. "Thanks. Be careful," Dr. Chen warned. "If there's any truth to what's in that note, you could be walking into something dangerous." Dangerous was nothing new. Jake had been walking into danger since he was old enough to throw a punch, but this felt different, bigger than bar fights and territory disputes. This was about innocence stolen, about someone's children disappearing into shadows. As he walked back to his Harley, The late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot, Jake found himself thinking about choices. He could turn the note over to the cops and wash his hands of it, go back to his simple life of bar shifts and solitary rides. Or he could follow the thread and see where it led, knowing it might unravel everything. The bike roared to life beneath him, its familiar rumble drowning out his doubts. He had Maria Santos's name and an address on Cypress Street. That was enough to start with. As he pulled onto the highway, Jake caught his reflection in a storefront window. Leather jacket, graying beard, scars both visible and hidden. Not exactly hero material. But maybe that was the point. Maybe sometimes it took someone from the margins to see what everyone else missed. The note crinkled in his pocket as he leaned into a turn, its desperate words branded into his memory. Somewhere out there, children were missing and time was running out. The veterinary clinic smelled of antiseptic and hay, a combination that reminded Jake of field hospitals in places he'd rather forget. Dr. Sarah Chen worked with practiced efficiency, her small hands gentle as she examined the donkey's wounds while Jake held the lead rope. "Cigarette burns," she confirmed, her voice tight with controlled anger. "And these rope marks suggest prolonged restraint. The poor thing's been through hell." She glanced up at Jake, taking in his leather vest and the tattoos snaking down his forearms. "Good thing you found her when you did." Jake nodded, watching the donkey, whom he'd started thinking of as Grace, munch contentedly on fresh hay. The transformation was remarkable. Clean and bandaged, she looked almost regal despite her ordeal. "I need to ask," Dr. Chen continued, preparing a syringe, "are you planning to keep her? Because donkeys need company." "Yeah, I know." Jake surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. "There's an old horse rescue about 20 miles from my place. Owner's a friend. I'll work something out." Dr. Chen smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd shown since he'd walked in with Grace. "You're not what I expected when my receptionist said a biker was bringing in an abused animal." Before Jake could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Tommy found something. "Meet me at Murphy's." "How long before she's ready to travel?" Jake asked. "Give me another hour to finish up here. She should be fine after that. Just needs rest and proper care." Jake left his number and promised to return, then fired up his Harley and headed for Murphy's bar. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town, and he found himself studying every alley, every corner, wondering what other secrets Millfield might be hiding. Murphy's was exactly what he'd expected. Dim lighting, scarred wooden tables, and the kind of atmosphere where questions weren't asked and stories weren't shared unless you wanted them to be. Tommy sat in a corner booth, nursing a beer and looking like he'd seen a ghost. "You're not going to believe this," Tommy said without preamble, as Jake slid into the opposite seat. "I did some digging on that address from the note. Turns out it's not just any house, it's where the Peterson family used to live." "Used to?" "Mom killed herself 3 months ago. Husband took off right after, left behind their 8-year-old daughter." Tommy leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Get this, the kid's been missing for 2 weeks. Jake felt ice form in his stomach. "Missing how?" "Walked out of her foster home and vanished. Police think she's a runaway, but here's the kicker, she's not the only one." Tommy pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. 4 kids have disappeared from the county system in the past 6 months. All around the same age, all from troubled situations. Jake studied the grainy photos, 2 boys, 2 girls, all with the hollow eyes of children who'd seen too much too young. One face made him pause, a thin girl with dark hair and serious expression. "Emma Peterson." "That's her. And according to my contact at social services, there might be more. Kids from other counties, other states. Someone's keeping it quiet. Why?" But even as Jake asked, darker possibilities were forming in his mind. He'd seen enough evil in his 42 years to know where missing children sometimes ended up. "That's what we need to figure out." Tommy finished his beer and stood. "I say we start with that address. House has been empty since the family left, but maybe—" "No," Jake's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "We do this smart. You keep digging into the official channels, find out who's supposed to be investigating these disappearances. I'll check out the house, but carefully. If someone's watching that place." Tommy nodded, understanding. They'd both served in places where rushing in got people killed. Back at the clinic, Grace seemed genuinely happy to see him, nuzzling his hand as he loaded her into the borrowed trailer. Dr. Chen had provided detailed care instructions and enough medication to last a week. "She's bonded to you already," the vet observed. "Donkeys are excellent judges of character." As Jake drove toward his property, Grace safely secured behind him, his mind kept returning to Emma Peterson's photograph. 8 years old, mother dead, father gone, lost in a system that was supposed to protect her. The cryptic note felt heavier in his pocket now. Help them find peace took on new meaning, when them might include children who'd never had a chance at peace in their short lives. His phone rang as he pulled into his driveway. Unknown number. "This is Jake. You found my note." The voice was female, young, scared. I wasn't sure anyone would understand. Jake's grip tightened on the phone. "Emma?" A sharp intake of breath. "How do you— Never mind. Can you help us, please? They're planning to move us again soon, and I don't think—" The line went dead. Jake stared at his phone, adrenaline surging through his system. The game had just changed completely. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned lot where Marcus had left Mabel for the night. He'd fashioned a makeshift shelter from salvaged plywood and tarps, ensuring she had enough hay and water. The donkey greeted him with a soft bray, her eyes brighter than they'd been the day before. "Morning, girl," Marcus murmured, checking her wounds. The cuts were healing well, though the deeper gashes would take time. He pulled the crumpled note from his jacket pocket, studying it again in the daylight. The childish handwriting seemed to mock him with its simplicity, yet something about those words, "Help us," they took Emma, gnawed at his gut like a rusty nail. His phone buzzed. "Unknown number. Yeah? You found the note," a woman's voice, strained and desperate. "Please tell me you found it." Marcus tensed, his free hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. "Who is this?" "My name is Sarah Chen. My daughter, she's missing. Emma's missing, and I don't know what else to do." The name from the note. Marcus walked away from Mabel, lowering his voice. "How'd you get this number?" "I've been watching the lot. Saw you take care of the donkey. Those kids, they hurt her on purpose. They knew someone would find the note." Her voice cracked. "They said if I went to the police, Emma would disappear forever." Marcus felt that familiar ice in his veins, the same coldness that had kept him alive in Afghanistan and later in the bloody feuds between motorcycle clubs. "Where are you?" "Coffee shop on 5th Street. Blue sedan across from the diner." He could see it from where he stood, a pale blue Honda with a figure hunched over the steering wheel. "Stay put. I'm coming over." Marcus approached the car cautiously, noting the woman's trembling hands on the wheel. Sarah Chen looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, clothes wrinkled. When she rolled down the window, he caught the scent of fear and desperation. "Show me some ID," he said. She fumbled for her wallet, producing a driver's license and a school photo of a young girl with bright eyes and pigtails. Emma Chen, age 8, missing for 4 days, according to the Amber Alert Marcus now remembered seeing. "Tell me everything," Marcus said, leaning against the car. Sarah's story spilled out in fragments. Emma had been walking home from school when she vanished. No witnesses, no surveillance footage, nothing. Then Sarah received a call, a distorted voice telling her that Emma was safe but wouldn't stay that way if she involved the authorities. They wanted something from her, something she claimed not to have. What do they want? Files, research files from my work. Sarah worked as a data analyst for the county's Child Services Department. They think I have information about some investigation, but I swear I don't know what they're talking about. Marcus studied her face, reading the micro-expressions he'd learned to interpret during interrogations overseas. She was holding something back, but her terror for her daughter was genuine. These files, what kind of investigation? I don't know. Maybe something about missing kids? There have been others, but the cases were handled by different departments. I only process placement data for foster care. Others. The word hung between them like smoke. How many others? I'm not sure. Maybe 5 or 6 in the past year. Kids who just vanished from the system. Runaways, they said. But Emma wasn't in the system. She's never been in foster care. Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to form, though the picture remained maddeningly unclear. These kids who disappeared from foster care, you have their names? Sarah nodded, pulling out her phone with shaking fingers. She showed him a list she'd compiled. Tyler Rodriguez, age 10, Jasmine Wright, age 7, Michael Torres, age 9, 3 others, all between 6 and 12 years old. The police said they were runaways, she whispered. But what if they weren't? Marcus memorized the names, his mind already working through possibilities. Someone was collecting children, and they thought Sarah had information that could expose them. The question was whether she actually did have it and didn't know, or if they'd made a mistake. These people who took Emma, they call you every day. Same distorted voice. They say they're watching me, that they'll know if I talk to anyone. Well, you just talk to me. Fear flashed across her face. Oh God, what if they... Easy. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. I've dealt with worse than whoever's behind this, but we need to be smart about it. He glanced back at Mabel, still visible in the lot. The donkey had been a message, he realized now. A test to see if Sarah would break protocol and make contact. Someone was playing games, using a mother's desperation as entertainment. That was their first mistake. Marcus Kozlov didn't like games. The address from the note led Jake to a rundown trailer park on the outskirts of town, where broken dreams seemed to collect like tumbleweeds against chain-link fences. He parked his Harley between 2 rusted cars and studied the numbers painted on weathered mailboxes until he found the right one. Trailer 47 sat at the end of a dirt road, its aluminum siding patched with duct tape and hope. Before he could knock, the door swung open. A woman stood in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes red-rimmed and desperate. She looked to be in her early 30s, but grief had aged her beyond her years. Her gaze swept over Jake's leather jacket and tattooed arms, and for a moment fear flickered across her face. "You're not who I was expecting," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found your note," Jake replied, pulling the crumpled paper from his pocket. Attached to a donkey that some kids were tormenting. The woman's face crumpled, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Oh God, it actually worked. I didn't think... I was so desperate. I've been putting those notes everywhere, hoping someone would... She stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Please come in. I'm Maria Santos." The trailer's interior was cramped but clean, filled with the kind of furniture that came from thrift stores and yard sales. What struck Jake most were the photographs covering every available surface, pictures of a young boy with Maria's dark eyes and a gap-toothed grin, school photos, birthday parties, little league games, a shrine to a missing child. "That's my son, Diego," Maria said, noticing his attention. "He's been gone for 3 weeks now." Jake settled onto a worn couch, studying the photos. "What happened?" Maria sat across from him, her hands twisting in her lap. He was walking home from his friend's house. Just 6 blocks. I've driven that route 1,000 times with him, told him to stay on the sidewalk, look both ways. He's a good kid, responsible. Her voice broke. He never made it home. "Did you call the police?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Of course I did. They took a report, asked if Diego had ever run away before. When I said no, they told me kids his age sometimes act out. They'd keep an eye out. That was 3 weeks ago. The last time a detective called was 5 days ago, and all he said was they were following leads." Jake leaned forward. "Tell me about the note. Why attach it to the donkey?" "That donkey belongs to old Mr. Hendricks down the road. Diego loved that animal, used to sneak it carrots from our garden. After he disappeared, I started walking past there every day, hoping maybe..." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've been putting notes everywhere. On bulletin boards, car windshields, telephone poles. Most people throw them away, but I thought if I put one on patches, someone might actually read it." Smart thinking. Jake pulled out his phone. "Do you have a recent photo of Diego I can see?" Maria handed him a school photo from the coffee table. The boy looked to be around 8 or 9, with his mother's dark eyes and an infectious smile. Something about the image nagged at Jake, a memory trying to surface. "Has anyone else approached you about Diego? Anyone asking questions or offering help?" "Just you." She paused, then added quietly, "There was one thing, though. The day after Diego disappeared, I found a white van parked outside our trailer, just sitting there with tinted windows. When I went out to look, it drove away. I've seen it twice since then, always in the neighborhood." Jake's blood chilled. White vans were a cliché in kidnapping cases, but clichés existed for a reason. "Did you tell the police about this?" "I tried. They said lots of people drive white vans, that I was probably imagining things because of stress." Her voice hardened. "They made me feel like I was going crazy." Standing up, Jake walked to the window and peered through the blinds. The trailer park was quiet, but he made note of sight lines and escape routes, old habits from his military days. "Maria, I need you to think carefully. In the weeks before Diego disappeared, did you notice anything unusual? People watching him, strangers asking about your family, anything that seemed off?" She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "There was a man at the grocery store about a month ago. He struck up a conversation while Diego was looking at comic books. Asked if Diego came there often, if he lived nearby. I thought he was just being friendly, but when I called Diego over, the man left quickly." "Can you describe him?" "Average height, maybe 40-something, brown hair, clean-shaven. He wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, so I didn't get a great look at his face." She stood up abruptly. "You think Diego was taken, don't you? You don't think he just wandered off?" Jake turned from the window, meeting her desperate gaze. "I think we need to find out." The abandoned warehouse on Miller Street looked like every other derelict building in this forgotten corner of the city, but Marcus's instincts told him otherwise. He'd circled the block twice on his Harley, noting the 2 clean windows on the 3rd floor and the fresh tire tracks in the gravel, despite the building's supposedly vacant status. Sarah sat behind him, her grip on his leather jacket tight enough to leave permanent creases. She'd barely spoken during the ride, but he could feel the tension radiating from her body like heat from an engine. The photograph of her missing daughter Emma remained tucked safely in his vest pocket, a constant reminder of what was at stake. "This is it," he murmured, cutting the engine 2 blocks away. The sudden silence felt oppressive after the comforting rumble of the motorcycle. "Stay close, and if I tell you to run, you don't argue." Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. "I've come this far. I'm not backing down now." They approached on foot, using the shadows cast by neighboring buildings for cover. Marcus had called Tank before they left, but his old army buddy was handling another situation across town. For now, they were on their own. The loading dock at the rear of the building showed signs of recent use. Fresh oil stains marked the concrete, and the massive steel door bore scratches around the lock mechanism. Marcus pulled out the small toolkit he always carried and went to work on the lock, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Where did you learn to do that?" Sarah whispered. "Prison taught me a lot of useful skills," he replied without looking up. The lock clicked open with a soft snick. "Most of them I wish I'd never needed." The interior of the warehouse was a maze of shipping containers and wooden crates, stacked high enough to create narrow corridors that twisted into darkness. Emergency lighting cast sickly yellow pools every few yards, leaving plenty of shadows to hide in. The air smelled of rust, motor oil, and something else, something organic and unpleasant that made Marcus's skin crawl. They moved deeper into the maze, following the sound of distant voices. Sarah's breathing had become shallow and quick, but she kept pace without complaint. Marcus found himself respecting her courage, even as he worried about bringing a civilian into what was clearly a dangerous situation. The voices grew louder as they approached the center of the warehouse. Marcus held up a hand, signaling Sarah to stop, then crept forward alone until he could peer around the corner of a shipping container. What he saw made his blood run cold. A makeshift camp had been set up in the central clearing, complete with folding tables, camping chairs, and a portable generator humming quietly in the corner. Maps covered one table, marked with red pins and cryptic notations, but it was the second table that captured his attention, covered with photographs of children, including one very familiar face. Emma's school picture stared back at him from among dozens of others, each photo tagged with dates, locations, and notes, written in a cramped, hurried hand. Some photos had red X's marked across them, and Marcus didn't want to think about what that might mean. 3 men stood around the tables, their conversation growing more heated with each passing moment. Marcus recognized the voice of Detective Raymond from their earlier encounter, but the other 2 were strangers. One was tall and thin with nervous energy, constantly checking his watch and pacing. The other was built like a prizefighter, all thick muscle and intimidating presence. "The timeline's been moved up," Detective Raymond was saying. "We need to make the next shipment tomorrow night instead of next week." The thin man shook his head violently. "That's not enough time. We haven't finished processing the latest batch, and if we rush things, if we don't move fast, we're all going to prison," the detective interrupted. "That biker's been asking questions, and now he's got the mother involved. It's only a matter of time before they start putting pieces together." Marcus felt Sarah's presence behind him before she spoke, her whispered words barely audible. "Is Emma there? Can you see her?" He turned to warn her back, but it was too late. Sarah had already moved to get her own view of the central area, and in her desperation to see her daughter, she knocked against a loose piece of metal sheeting. The clang echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. The conversation at the tables stopped instantly. "What was that?" the thin man hissed. Marcus grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her away from the container just as flashlight beams began sweeping their direction. They ran through the maze of crates and containers, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floor despite their attempts at stealth. Behind them, shouts erupted as their pursuers gave chase. Marcus's mind raced, calculating distances and escape routes while his legs pumped harder. They needed to reach the loading dock before the warehouse lights suddenly blazed to life, eliminating every shadow and hiding place. They were exposed, vulnerable, and running out of options fast. The warehouse district felt like a graveyard at 3 in the morning. Jake killed the Harley's engine 2 blocks away, letting the machine coast to silence behind a cluster of rusted shipping containers. The night air carried the scent of motor oil and decay, punctuated by the distant sound of freight trains cutting through the darkness. Buttercup shifted restlessly in the makeshift trailer, sensing the tension that radiated from Jake's shoulders. He'd fashioned a simple cart from salvaged parts, unable to leave the donkey behind after everything they'd been through together. The animal had become more than a companion. It was a witness, a piece of evidence, and perhaps the only living link to Sarah Martinez. Jake checked his phone one final time. Elena's last message glowed on the cracked screen. Building 7, red door. Come alone. The timestamp showed it had arrived 47 minutes ago. Every second of delay felt like another nail in whatever coffin awaited them. Moving through the shadows between abandoned structures, Jake's military training kicked into overdrive. His eyes swept corners, calculated sight lines, identified potential escape routes. The conspiracy that had started with a simple act of kindness now felt like a web designed to trap him. But walking away wasn't an option. Not when children's lives hung in the balance. Building 7 emerged from the gloom like a concrete monument to industrial decay. 3 stories of broken windows and rusted fire escapes, with weeds growing through cracks in the foundation. The red door Elena had mentioned stood slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond the threshold. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the knife sheathed at his belt. He'd seen enough combat to know when a situation felt wrong, and everything about this screamed ambush. But Sarah Martinez's desperate face haunted his thoughts, and the cryptic note from the donkey's collar had led him this far. He couldn't turn back now. The door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the empty building. Jake stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the deeper shadows within. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, creating a patchwork of silver and black across debris-strewn floors. "Elena?" His voice carried further than intended, disappearing into the building's hollow depths. Footsteps answered from somewhere above, quick, nervous movements across creaking floorboards. Jake found a staircase and began climbing, each step carefully placed to minimize noise. The banister wobbled under his grip, corroded by years of neglect. The second floor opened into what had once been office space. Cubicle walls lay scattered like fallen dominoes, and computer monitors sat gutted and dark. But it was the third floor that drew Jake forward, pulled by an instinct he couldn't name. Elena waited in what had been the building's conference room. She stood silhouetted against a wall of windows, her small frame dwarfed by the cavernous space. As Jake approached, he could see tear tracks glistening on her cheeks. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I said I would. Where are the children? Where's your daughter?" Elena's composure cracked, and she sank into a chair that looked salvaged from the building's former life. "It's not that simple. They have her, but they want something first, something I gave away." "The note," Jake said, understanding beginning to dawn. "You wrote the note we found on Buttercup." She nodded miserably. "It was supposed to be insurance, proof of what they're doing. But when they took Maria, I panicked. I couldn't keep it with me, couldn't risk them finding it. So I hid it with the donkey, thinking no one would look there." Jake felt the pieces clicking into place, but the picture they formed made his blood run cold. "What kind of proof?" "Names, dates, locations, financial records, everything I could gather while working for them." Elena's words came faster now, as if a dam had burst. "They're not just taking homeless kids or runaways. They have a system, a network. Foster children who won't be missed, kids from broken homes. They ship them out of the country." The weight of the revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd stumbled into something far larger than a simple kidnapping. "How many children?" "Dozens, maybe more. I only saw a fraction of the operation." Elena stood suddenly, pacing to the windows. "But they know the note is gone. They know someone has it, and they'll kill Maria if I don't get it back." Jake's mind raced through possibilities, calculating odds and potential outcomes. Every scenario seemed to end badly for the children caught in this web of human trafficking. But surrender wasn't in his nature, and he'd learned long ago that the most desperate situations often presented unexpected opportunities. "We're not giving them anything," he said finally. "But we need that evidence to be worth something. Who else knows about this?" Elena turned from the window, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since Jake had arrived. "There's a detective, someone clean. I've been feeding him information, but I never had enough proof to make arrests stick." "Then it's time to change that." The warehouse district felt like a graveyard at 3 in the morning, shadows pooling between rusted shipping containers and abandoned loading docks. Jake cut the Harley's engine 2 blocks away, the sudden silence amplifying every creak of settling metal and distant drip of water. He'd chosen this approach carefully. Meredith's information about the Blackwood Foundation's legitimate operations had revealed a pattern of late-night activity at this particular facility. Rocco trotted beside him as they moved through the maze of industrial debris, the donkey's hooves surprisingly quiet on the cracked asphalt. The animal had become an unexpected ally, somehow sensing danger before Jake could spot it. More than once during their reconnaissance missions, Rocco's ears had swiveled toward threats that Jake's military training had missed. The target building loomed ahead, a converted warehouse with fresh security cameras and reinforced doors that looked out of place among the decay. Jake counted 4 guards during his earlier surveillance, but he suspected more waited inside. The Blackwood Foundation didn't invest in heavy security for legitimate charity work. A chain-link fence topped with razor wire surrounded the property, but Jake had spotted a weakness where recent construction had left a gap near the loading bay. He approached carefully, testing each step for loose gravel that might announce his presence. The gap was barely wide enough for him, and getting Rocco through would be impossible. "Stay here, boy," he whispered, scratching behind the donkey's ears. "Keep watch." Rocco's dark eyes reflected understanding, and the animal settled into a crouch behind a pile of discarded pallets. Jake had learned not to question the donkey's intelligence. Whatever Sarah Chen had taught him, it went far beyond normal animal training. The gap in the fence scraped against Jake's leather jacket as he squeezed through, the sound barely audible over the distant hum of the city. He moved along the building's perimeter, noting the positions of motion sensors and camera blind spots. His Delta Force training kicked in automatically. Assess, adapt, advance. A service door on the building's east side showed signs of frequent use, its handle worn smooth despite the facility's recent renovation. Jake tested it gently and found it unlocked, either sloppy security or a trap. He eased it open just enough to peer inside. The interior contradicted the warehouse's industrial exterior. Clean white corridors stretched in both directions, lit by harsh fluorescent strips that reminded Jake of a hospital. The air carried an antiseptic smell mixed with something else, fear maybe. He'd encountered that particular cocktail in too many war zones to mistake it. Voices echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. Jake moved toward them, staying close to the wall and testing each step for squeaky floorboards. The corridor opened into a central hub with multiple branching hallways, each marked with cryptic alphanumeric codes instead of room numbers. The voices grew clearer as he approached a partially open door marked Administrative Wing. Through the gap, Jake could see two men in expensive suits examining files at a metal desk. One he recognized from the photograph Meredith had shown him, Dr. Marcus Webb, the Blackwood Foundation's Director of Operations. "The Chen boys' integration is proceeding ahead of schedule," Webb was saying, his tone clinical and detached. "The new behavioral modifications show promise for the next phase." Jake's blood turned to ice. Tommy Chen was here, alive, but the casual way Webb discussed modifications sent rage coursing through his veins. He forced himself to remain still, gathering intelligence before acting. "What about the mother?" the second man asked. "She's been asking questions, making noise with social services." "Handled," Webb replied dismissively. "Her credibility is compromised. Previous drug arrests, unstable employment history. Who would believe her fantasies about secret facilities?" The methodical destruction of Sarah Chen's life crystallized before Jake. They hadn't just taken her son, they'd systematically eliminated her ability to seek help. No wonder she'd been desperate enough to trust a complete stranger. The other subjects. "Progressing normally. We'll have a full cohort ready for transfer by month's end. The buyers are quite enthusiastic about our results." Buyers. Jake's hands clenched into fists as the full scope of the operation became clear. This wasn't just kidnapping, it was human trafficking with some kind of psychological conditioning component. Children stolen, broken, and sold to the highest bidder. A soft sound from behind made Jake freeze, footsteps approaching fast. He'd been so focused on the conversation that he'd missed the approaching guard. No time for stealth now. Jake spun as a security guard rounded the corner, hand moving toward his radio. Training took over. Jake's arm shot out, catching the man across the throat and cutting off his shout. They went down together. Jake's hand clamped over the guard's mouth as they struggled. The impact echoed through the corridor. The voices in the office stopped abruptly. "Check that out," Webb ordered sharply. Jake's cover was blown, but he'd learned what he needed. Tommy Chen was alive, somewhere in this building. Now came the hard part. Getting him out before Webb's operation disappeared into the night, taking the children with them forever. The abandoned warehouse squatted like a malignant tumor against the pre-dawn sky, its broken windows reflecting Jake's headlight as he killed the engine 2 blocks away. The silence that followed felt oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of early morning traffic and the soft snort of Dusty shifting nervously in the trailer behind him. Jake checked his phone one last time. Sarah's location tracker showed she was inside, but the signal had been stationary for over 2 hours. Either she was being held, or worse. He pushed the thought away and focused on the tactical situation. 3 possible entry points: the main loading dock, a side door he'd spotted during his reconnaissance, and a skylight that looked partially collapsed. The Glock felt reassuring against his ribs as he approached the building's perimeter. Years of military training kicked in, muscle memory guiding his movements as he hugged the shadows and avoided the patches of broken glass that would announce his presence. The side door hung slightly ajar, darkness yawning beyond it like an open mouth. Inside, the warehouse stretched into gloom, punctuated by shafts of sickly light filtering through grimy windows. The air tasted of rust and decay, with an underlying chemical tang that made his nose burn. Jake moved carefully, each footstep calculated, his breathing controlled and silent. Voices drifted from somewhere deeper in the building. Male voices, casual conversation that chilled him with its normalcy. These weren't desperate criminals backed into a corner. They were professionals going about their business. That made them infinitely more dangerous. "Should be here within the hour," one voice was saying. "Then we can finally clean up this mess." "About time," another replied. "That biker's been nothing but trouble since he stuck his nose in. Should have taken care of him when we had the chance." Jake's jaw tightened. They were talking about him, which meant they knew he was coming. This whole thing reeked of a trap, but Sarah was in there somewhere, and possibly other children. He had no choice but to spring it. The voices led him to a makeshift office area constructed from shipping containers. Light spilled from between the metal walls, and through a gap, Jake could see movement inside. 2 men, both armed, both relaxed. Too relaxed. His instincts screamed danger, but he pressed forward. A soft sound behind him made him freeze. The whisper of fabric against concrete, barely audible but unmistakably human. Jake spun, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion, but the taser caught him center mass before he could bring it to bear. Electricity coursed through his body, muscles seizing, vision exploding into white static. He hit the concrete hard, his gun clattering away into the darkness. Through the haze of pain, he heard footsteps approaching and the satisfied grunt of his attacker. "Told you he'd come," a familiar voice said. Detective Morrison stepped into view, holstering the taser with a smirk. Predictable as sunrise, these hero types. Jake tried to speak, but his muscles were still twitching from the electrical assault. Morrison kicked his gun further away and gestured to someone behind him. 2 more men emerged from the shadows, lifting Jake roughly to his feet and dragging him toward the container office. The space inside was larger than it appeared from outside, furnished with computers, filing cabinets, and a wall of monitors showing various locations around the city. Sarah sat zip-tied to a chair in the corner, conscious but clearly drugged, her eyes struggling to focus as Jake was forced into the room. "The famous Jake Martinez," Morrison said, settling behind a makeshift desk. "You've caused us considerable inconvenience. Did you really think you could waltz in here and play cavalry? Where are the other children?" Jake's voice was hoarse, but he managed to get the words out. Morrison laughed. "Straight to business. I respect that. They're safe for now, being prepared for transport to their new homes, people who appreciate their particular qualities." The casual way he said it made Jake's skin crawl. These weren't just kidnappers, they were traffickers, and Morrison was neck-deep in it. "How long have you been running this operation?" "Long enough to perfect the system. Children go missing from broken homes, bad neighborhoods. Cases that don't get much attention, don't generate public pressure. We take care of them, find them good homes with people willing to pay premium prices." Sarah made a small sound, perhaps trying to speak. Morrison glanced at her with the same expression someone might use when looking at livestock. This one was supposed to be a simple pickup. Her mother was becoming problematic, asking too many questions. But then you had to involve yourself. Jake tested the zip ties holding his wrists. Tight, professionally applied, but not impossible. He needed time, needed to keep Morrison talking while he worked. Elena Vasquez loved her daughter. She was trying to protect her, Elena Vasquez was a liability, Morrison said coldly. Just like you. The only question now is how to dispose of both problems with minimum exposure. He checked his watch. Our cleanup crew should be here soon. They're very thorough. The safe house felt more like a trap with each passing hour. Marcus paced the small living room while Elena sat hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, her fingers flying across the keys. The donkey, who they'd started calling Hope, stood quietly in the small backyard, occasionally looking through the window as if sensing the tension inside. "I've got something," Elena said, her voice cutting through the silence. 3 more children reported missing in the past week, all from different counties. Same pattern. Kids from broken homes, no media attention, investigations going nowhere fast. Marcus stopped pacing and moved to look over her shoulder. The screen showed a map dotted with red markers, each one representing a missing child. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for, a systematic targeting of the most vulnerable. "How many total?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. 17 children in the past 6 months, maybe more that haven't been properly reported. Elena's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. And look at this. Every single case was initially handled by the same state social services coordinator. The name on the screen made Marcus's blood run cold. Margaret Thornfield, the same woman whose business card they'd found in the warehouse. She's the gatekeeper, Marcus realized. She decides which cases get attention and which ones disappear into the system. Someone pays her to look the other way. Elena nodded grimly. "And I think I know who. Cross-reference those dates with this." She pulled up another screen showing a series of private jet flight logs. "Every time a child goes missing, this plane makes a trip from the regional airport to a private airfield in the Bahamas. The aircraft registration led to a shell company, which led to another shell company, but Elena's persistence had eventually traced it back to its source. Blackwater Holdings, a private investment firm with connections to several high-profile politicians and business leaders. "These aren't random kidnappers," Marcus said, the pieces clicking into place. "This is an organized operation with serious money and protection behind it." Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. They exchanged glances before she answered, putting it on speaker. "You've been very busy," came a cultured voice, male, with the kind of accent that suggested expensive private schools. "Though I must say, your investigation skills are quite impressive." "Who is this?" Elena demanded. "Someone who would very much like to meet with you both. You've stumbled onto something rather delicate, and I think we should discuss how to proceed in a way that benefits everyone." Marcus leaned toward the phone. "If you think we're going to make some kind of deal—" "Oh, but you already have made a deal, Mr. Kane. The moment you rescued that animal and inserted yourself into this situation. You see, we know exactly where you are. The safe house at 1247 Oak Ridge Lane. Charming place, though the security could use some work." Marcus was already moving, grabbing his jacket and the pistol from the table. Elena slammed the laptop shut and stuffed it into her bag. "What do you want?" she asked, following Marcus toward the back door. "A conversation. Nothing more. There's a diner called Murphy's on Route 9, about 20 minutes south of your current location. Come alone, and we can discuss this like civilized people. Bring law enforcement or try to run, and the children we currently have will simply disappear forever." The line went dead. Marcus peered through the window blinds and saw them. 2 black SUVs parked at either end of the street, engines running. They'd been found. "Back door," he whispered. But Elena was already there, looking out at the yard where another vehicle had just pulled into the alley behind the house. "We're boxed in," she said. Hope the donkey was standing near the back fence, and Marcus noticed something odd about the animal's behavior. Instead of showing fear at the approaching vehicles, the donkey seemed almost expectant, watching Marcus with those intelligent eyes. "The storm drain," Marcus said suddenly, remembering something from his reconnaissance of the area. There's a storm drain that runs under this entire neighborhood. The access point is in the basement," Elena finished, understanding immediately. They grabbed their essential gear and headed downstairs, Marcus keeping watch while Elena found the metal grate that covered the drain access. It was old and rusted, but a few hard kicks loosened it enough to pry open. The space beyond was tight but navigable, a concrete tunnel that had been built decades ago when the neighborhood was first developed. They could hear footsteps above them as their pursuers entered the house. As they crawled through the darkness, Elena whispered, "We're still going to that meeting. Are you insane? It's obviously a trap, maybe. But it's also our only chance to find out where those children are being held. And Marcus, we're running out of time." Behind them they could hear voices in the basement, growing closer. Ahead lay only darkness and the slim hope that they could stay ahead of their pursuers long enough to save 17 missing children. The real chase had finally begun. The warehouse district stretched before them like a graveyard of rust and broken dreams. Marcus killed the Harley's engine 3 blocks away, not wanting to announce their arrival. The silence felt oppressive after hours of road noise, broken only by the distant hum of industrial machinery and the whisper of wind through abandoned loading docks. Sarah clutched the printed satellite images they'd studied at the gas station. Her hands trembled despite her efforts to appear calm. "Building 47 should be 2 streets over," she whispered, though no one was around to hear them. Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the maze of concrete and steel ahead. Every shadow could hide a threat, every corner a trap. The cryptic phone call that had led them here felt increasingly like bait, but they were past the point of turning back. Emma's trail had gone cold everywhere else. They moved through the industrial wasteland on foot, staying close to the building's shadows. The donkey followed behind them, its hooves surprisingly quiet on the cracked asphalt. Marcus had initially planned to leave the animal somewhere safe, but something told him they might need the creature that had started this entire journey. Building 47 rose before them like a monument to decay. Most of its windows were boarded up, but faint light leaked through gaps in the upper floors. Marcus held up a hand, stopping their advance. A black sedan sat parked behind a cluster of dumpsters, nearly invisible in the gloom. "Someone's here," Sarah breathed. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. His blood ran cold as he read it. 3rd floor. "Come alone, or the children pay." Sarah read over his shoulder, her face going pale. "It's a trap. Everything's been a trap since day 1, Marcus replied grimly. "Doesn't mean we have a choice." He studied the building's exterior, noting the fire escape ladders and loading dock entrances. The front door hung ajar, another invitation that screamed danger. But somewhere in that decrepit structure, children were waiting for rescue. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. "I'm going with you," Sarah said, anticipating his next words. "No, you stay here with—" "Don't even finish that sentence." Her voice carried steel beneath the fear. "Emma is my daughter. I've come this far." Marcus wanted to argue, but he recognized the futility. She'd follow him anyway, and at least this way he could keep track of her. "Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say, when I say it." They approached the building's main entrance, every step measured and careful. The donkey seemed to sense the tension, its ears swiveling at every small sound. Inside, the warehouse opened into a vast space filled with abandoned machinery and shipping containers. Weak fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in an unstable, nauseating glow. Their footsteps echoed despite their efforts at stealth. The concrete floor was littered with debris and old newspapers that rustled with every breath of air. A metal staircase led to the upper levels, its railings streaked with rust that looked disturbingly like dried blood in the poor lighting. Halfway to the stairs, Marcus heard it, a soft whimpering that raised every protective instinct in his body. Children's voices, muffled but unmistakable. Sarah gripped his arm so tightly her nails drew blood through his jacket. "3rd floor," she whispered urgently. But Marcus held back, scanning the shadows above them. This felt wrong, too easy. The mysterious caller had wanted them here, had guided them step by step. Why make it simple now? A metallic clang echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Multiple people, moving with purpose. Marcus drew the pistol he'd tucked into his waistband, checking the safety with practiced ease. We need to move, now. They climbed the stairs as quickly as stealth allowed. The second floor was another maze of abandoned office spaces and storage rooms. But the sounds from above grew clearer with each step. Children's voices, adult commands, the scrape of furniture being moved. On the third-floor landing, Marcus paused to listen. A hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors that could hide anything. The voices came from their left, behind a door marked Conference Room B. Light spilled from beneath it. Sarah started toward the sound, but Marcus caught her shoulder. Through a grimy window at the hallway's end, he could see movement in the parking area below. More vehicles arriving. Black SUVs with tinted windows. "We're running out of time," he muttered. The conference room door was unlocked. Marcus tested the handle carefully, then eased it open just enough to peer inside. What he saw made his blood freeze. 6 children sat bound to chairs, their faces tear-streaked but alive. Emma was among them, recognizable from the photos Sarah had shown him. But standing behind them, assault rifle cradled casually in his arms, was Detective Morrison, the same cop who'd been asking questions about their investigation just days earlier. The abandoned warehouse loomed against the storm-darkened sky like a concrete tomb. Rain hammered the corrugated metal roof as Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, studying the building's layout. 3 vehicles sat in the gravel lot, 2 black SUVs and a white van that made his stomach clench with recognition. Sarah pressed against the container beside him, her breathing shallow. "That's the van from the video," she whispered, confirming his worst fears. Through the rain-streaked windows, they could see movement inside the warehouse. Shadows passed behind yellowed glass, distorted figures that could be anyone, or anything. Marcus pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over Detective Chen's number. The smart play was to call for backup, wait for the cavalry, but Elena's words echoed in his mind, how the system had failed her daughter, how they'd run out of time before. "We go in quiet," he decided, pocketing the phone, "just to confirm what we're dealing with. If those kids are in there." Sarah nodded, rain streaming down her face. She'd insisted on coming despite his protests, and now he was grateful. Her determination reminded him why they'd started this crusade in the first place. They moved along the warehouse's perimeter, Marcus's boots silent despite his size. Years of covert operations had taught him to move like smoke when necessary. A side entrance hung slightly ajar, darkness bleeding through the gap like an invitation to hell. Marcus tested the door with careful pressure. Ancient hinges protested with the faintest squeal before he froze, listening. Voices carried from somewhere deep inside, adult voices, discussing logistics with the casual efficiency of practiced criminals. "The next shipment moves tomorrow night," a gravelly voice was saying. "Boss wants the older ones prepared for transport." Marcus's blood turned to ice. Behind him, Sarah's sharp intake of breath confirmed she'd heard it too. This wasn't just about missing children, it was about trafficking them. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a maze of stacked crates and abandoned machinery. Emergency lighting cast sickly pools of yellow throughout the cavernous space, creating deep shadows perfect for concealment. The voices grew clearer as they advanced, guided by the sound toward what appeared to be a makeshift office area constructed from shipping containers. Through gaps in the metal walls, Marcus could see 3 men hunched over a table covered with documents and laptop computers. One wore an expensive suit despite the grimy surroundings, clearly management rather than muscle. The other 2 looked like hired thugs, all bulk and bad intentions. But it was what lay beyond the office that stopped Marcus cold. Through an open doorway, he glimpsed a series of smaller spaces, cages, essentially, constructed from chain-link fencing. In the dim light, he could make out small figures huddled inside. Children. Sarah saw them at the same instant. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling what would have been a sob. Marcus grabbed her arm, steadying her as rage threatened to overwhelm his tactical thinking. "We need to get them out," Sarah whispered, barely audible. "I know, but we do this smart, or everyone dies." Marcus counted at least 6 children in the visible cages, ranging from maybe 8 to 15 years old. They appeared unharmed but terrified, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. One girl with dark hair that reminded him painfully of Rosa sat by herself, staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. The suited man stood, checking his watch. "I'm heading back to coordinate with our contacts. Keep everything locked down until transport arrives." Marcus realized they had minutes, maybe less, before this man left, and potentially triggered some security protocol that would make rescue impossible. As the criminal leader moved toward what appeared to be the main exit, Marcus made his decision. He signaled Sarah to stay hidden, then began moving through the shadows toward the office. The 2 remaining guards were focused on their computers, probably updating inventory logs of human cargo. The thought made Marcus's vision blur with fury. The first guard never heard him coming. Marcus's arm locked around the man's throat, cutting off his air supply until he went limp. The second guard looked up just in time to see Marcus's fist connecting with his jaw. The sound of bone-meeting knuckle echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. Both men dropped unconscious to the concrete floor. Marcus quickly bound them with zip ties from his jacket, then grabbed the keys hanging from the first guard's belt. "Sarah," he called softly. "Clear." She emerged from hiding, immediately moving toward the children's enclosure. The kids shrank back as she approached, too traumatized to trust anyone new. "It's okay," she said gently, her voice carrying the authority of motherhood. "We're here to take you home." Marcus began unlocking the cages, his hands shaking slightly as the full scope of this nightmare became real. These weren't just statistics or case files, they were somebody's children, stolen from everything they'd ever known. As the first cage swung open, he wondered if they were already too late to stop the suited man from escaping. The warehouse door exploded inward with a crash that echoed through the cavernous space like thunder. Jake rolled through the opening, his body moving on pure instinct as gunfire erupted behind him. The Harley's engine screamed in protest as he gunned it between towering stacks of shipping containers, weaving through the maze of steel and shadow. Behind him, Donkey's hooves clattered against the concrete floor as the animal followed, somehow keeping pace despite the chaos. The beast had refused to stay hidden when Jake made his move, and now there was no time to argue with a stubborn donkey about tactical decisions. "There!" Marcus Kellerman's voice boomed from somewhere in the darkness. "Don't let them reach the north exit!" Muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse like deadly fireworks as Jake leaned low over the handlebars, feeling bullets whistle past his head. His years of combat experience kicked in, muscle memory guiding him through evasive maneuvers that had kept him alive in far worse situations than this. But this wasn't just about survival anymore. Somewhere in this labyrinth of containers were the missing children, and Sarah Martinez was counting on him to bring her son home. Jake killed the engine and rolled the bike behind a stack of crates marked with shipping labels from overseas. The sudden silence felt deafening after the roar of the motorcycle. He could hear boots pounding against concrete, getting closer, and the harsh whispers of men coordinating their search pattern. "Miguel," he called out softly, hoping his voice would carry to wherever the children were being held. "Miguel Martinez, your mother sent me." A faint sound reached his ears. Was that crying? It came from deeper in the warehouse, past a wall of containers that stretched toward the ceiling. Jake checked his pistol, confirmed he had one full magazine left, and prepared to move. Donkey nudged against his shoulder, the animal's dark eyes reflecting what little light filtered through the grimy windows high above. For reasons he couldn't explain, Jake found comfort in the creature's presence. They'd started this strange journey together, and apparently they'd finish it the same way. "Stay close, but stay quiet," he whispered to the donkey, knowing it was ridiculous to expect the animal to understand tactical commands. Jake crept forward, using the containers as cover while he worked his way toward the source of the crying. The warehouse was larger than he'd initially realized, with multiple levels connected by metal catwalks and service stairs, perfect for hiding kidnapped children where no one would think to look. As he rounded a corner, Jake nearly walked into two armed guards standing beside a reinforced door built into the side of a modified shipping container. Through the small window in the door, he could see movement inside, small figures huddled together in the dim light. His blood ran cold as he counted at least 6 children, all appearing to be between 8 and 12 years old. One of them, a boy with dark hair and tear-stained cheeks, looked exactly like the photo Sarah had shown him of her son Miguel. The guards were focused on the search happening elsewhere in the warehouse, their backs partially turned as they listened to radio chatter from their colleagues. Jake holstered his pistol and drew the combat knife from his boot instead. In close quarters like this, silence was more valuable than firepower. He moved like a shadow, years of military training allowing him to close the distance without making a sound. The first guard went down before he even knew what hit him, Jake's hand clamping over his mouth while the knife found its mark. The second guard started to turn, reaching for his radio, but Jake was already moving. The brief struggle was over in seconds. Jake grabbed the keys from the first guard's belt and quickly unlocked the container door. "Miguel Martinez?" he asked quietly as frightened young faces looked up at him. A boy in the back corner raised his hand tentatively. "My mama, did she really send you?" "She did, kid, and we're getting you all out of here right now." But even as Jake helped the children out of their prison, he could hear Kellerman's men regrouping, their search pattern tightening like a noose. The north exit was blocked, and the way they'd come in was crawling with armed guards. That's when he remembered something from his reconnaissance, the old freight elevator at the far end of the warehouse. If it still worked, it would take them up to the loading dock on the second level, where a fire escape led down to the alley behind the building. "Listen to me," Jake told the children as they clustered around him, their eyes wide with fear and hope. "We're going to move fast and quiet. Stay together, do exactly what I say, and we're all going home tonight." Donkey appeared beside them as if summoned, and somehow the sight of the gentle animal seemed to calm the children's fears. Jake shouldered his rifle and prepared to lead them through the most dangerous gauntlet of his life. The abandoned warehouse stood like a concrete tomb against the storm-darkened sky, its broken windows staring blindly at the world below. Jake cut his engine 2 blocks away, the sudden silence almost deafening after hours of riding through the night. His leather jacket was soaked through, rain still streaming from his beard as he studied the building through binoculars. "This has to be it," he muttered, recognizing the distinctive water tower from the photograph they'd found in Councilman Morrison's office. The same tower that appeared in the background of those horrific images, barely visible but unmistakably real. His phone buzzed. A text from Maria, "Police are 20 minutes out, don't go in alone." Jake's jaw tightened. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. If those kids were inside, if they were still alive, every second counted. He'd seen what these monsters were capable of, the cold calculation behind their operation. They wouldn't hesitate to eliminate evidence if they suspected exposure. The donkey, Chester, was safe now in Maria's care, but the animal's rescue had started this deadly chain of events. That cryptic note tucked in his halter had been more than a cry for help. It had been a breadcrumb trail leading to something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Thunder rumbled overhead as Jake approached the building's perimeter. The chain-link fence had been cut in several places, probably by other urban explorers or vagrants seeking shelter. He slipped through one of the gaps, his boots splashing through puddles of oil-stained water. The loading dock doors were secured with new padlocks, suspicious for a supposedly abandoned building. But the third-floor fire escape ladder hung just within reach. Jake tested his weight against the rusted metal, climbing carefully as the structure groaned beneath him. Through a broken window on the 4th floor, he heard voices, low, urgent conversation that made his blood run cold. He pressed himself against the brick wall, straining to listen. Moving them tonight. The whole operation's compromised. What about the Morrison situation? Handled. They'll find his body in the river by morning. Suicide driven by guilt over his gambling debts. Jake's fists clenched. Morrison had been their inside source, the one person willing to testify against the conspiracy. Now he was just another loose end tied off by these predators. He eased along the fire escape until he found a window with a clear view into the building's interior. The warehouse had been converted into a twisted maze of rooms and corridors. Industrial lighting cast harsh shadows, revealing armed guards patrolling the catwalks above. And there, in a cluster of makeshift cells below, he saw them. Children, maybe a dozen, ranging from 8 to 16 years old. They huddled together in small groups, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. Jake's heart hammered as he recognized Sarah Chen, the 12-year-old who'd vanished from the park 3 weeks ago. Her mother had been searching desperately, posting flyers throughout the city. One of the guards was approaching the cells with what looked like syringes. Jake didn't need to guess what was in them. Sedatives to keep the children compliant during transport. Once they were moved from this location, they'd disappear forever into a network that stretched far beyond the city limits. His phone showed 6 minutes until the police arrived. Not enough time. Jake made his choice. The window frame splintered as he crashed through it, glass shards raining down as he rolled across the concrete floor. Shouts erupted from the guards above, but he was already moving, using the maze of storage containers for cover. "Federal agent!" he shouted, though it wasn't true anymore. The lie might buy him precious seconds of confusion. The building is surrounded. Gunfire erupted, bullets sparking off metal and concrete around him. Jake drew his own weapon, returning fire as he advanced toward the cell area. The children were screaming now, pressing themselves against the far walls of their prison. One of the guards appeared at the end of a corridor, weapon raised. Jake's shot took him center mass, dropping him instantly. No time for hesitation, no room for mercy. These weren't just criminals, they were parasites feeding on innocence. "The keys!" Jake called to the children as he reached their cells. "Where does the guard keep the keys?" A boy pointed toward the fallen guard with shaking fingers. Jake retrieved the ring of keys, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. The first cell opened with a metallic clang. "Stay close to me," he told them, his voice firm but reassuring. "We're getting out of here." Above them, more guards were converging on their position, but in the distance Jake could hear the wail of police sirens growing louder. The cavalry was almost here. He looked at the frightened faces surrounding him, children who'd been stolen from their families, their lives forever changed by unthinkable cruelty. But they were alive, they were breathing, and in moments they'd be free. The warehouse shook as police vehicles surrounded the building, searchlights piercing the darkness. The abandoned warehouse loomed against the storm-darkened sky like a monument to forgotten dreams. Jake cut the Harley's engine 2 blocks away, the sudden silence broken only by distant thunder and the soft braying of Patches, who seemed to sense the gravity of what lay ahead. Rain began to fall in fat drops that splattered against the cracked asphalt. Sarah's hands trembled as she checked her phone one last time. No signal. The kidnappers had chosen their location well, isolated, cut off from the world, perfect for their twisted operations. She looked at Jake, drawing strength from his steady presence. Behind them, Detective Morrison and his tactical team waited in unmarked vehicles, ready to move on Jake's signal. "Remember," Morrison's voice crackled through the small earpiece Jake wore, "we need solid evidence before we can act. Get them talking. Make them incriminate themselves." Jake nodded grimly. The wire taped to his chest felt cold against his skin. He'd worn one before, years ago, when his life had taken a different path. Some skills, it seemed, never truly left you. The warehouse district stretched before them like a concrete graveyard. Most of the buildings stood empty, their windows dark and broken, but the target building, a 3-story brick structure with loading docks, showed signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks in the mud, lights visible through covered windows on the upper floors. Patches whinnied softly, ears pricked forward. The little donkey had an uncanny ability to sense danger, and right now every line of his body spoke of alertness. Jake reached out to stroke the animal's neck, finding comfort in the familiar gesture. "He knows," Sarah whispered. "Somehow, he always knows." They approached the building from the east side, using the maze of rusted shipping containers as cover. Jake's military training kicked in automatically: check corners, watch for movement, listen for sounds that didn't belong. The rain grew heavier, drumming against metal and concrete, providing natural sound cover for their approach. At the building's rear entrance, they found exactly what Jake had expected: a steel door reinforced with additional locks, security cameras mounted at strategic angles, and most tellingly, a small ventilation system that suggested the building was being used to house people for extended periods. Through the earpiece, Morrison's voice was barely audible. Thermal imaging shows at least 6 heat signatures on the second floor, clustered in what looks like a large room. 3 more signatures moving around the first floor. Can't get a clear read on the third level, too much interference. 9 people minimum. Jake filed the information away, his mind automatically calculating angles of approach, potential escape routes, and the best way to keep Sarah safe when everything inevitably went sideways. A sound from within the building made them all freeze, the unmistakable voice of a child crying. Sarah's intake of breath was sharp and painful to hear. Her maternal instincts warred with the need for tactical patience, and Jake could see her fighting every impulse that screamed at her to rush inside. "Easy," he murmured, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We do this right, or we don't do it at all." The main entrance was around front, flanked by those loading docks Jake had observed earlier. As they worked their way around the building's perimeter, keeping to the shadows, more details became clear. The operation was larger than they'd initially suspected. Multiple vehicles parked in concealed areas, evidence of regular traffic, and most disturbing of all, toys scattered near one of the dumpsters. Children's shoes, a teddy bear with one arm missing. Sarah saw them too, and Jake watched her face harden into something he'd seen on warriors preparing for battle. Whatever maternal softness had driven her desperate search was crystallizing into something harder, more dangerous. She was no longer just a mother looking for her child. She was becoming someone capable of terrible things if necessary. The front door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling out into the rain. Too easy, too convenient. Jake's instincts screamed trap, but they were committed now. Behind them, Morrison's team would be moving into position, ready to breach the moment Jake gave the signal. Patches pressed close to Jake's leg, the donkey's warmth a reminder of how this all began. A simple act of kindness that had unraveled into something far larger and more sinister than anyone could have imagined. The note that had started it all seemed like ancient history now, but its message remained crystal clear. Someone had been trying to expose this operation from the inside, and they'd used the only messenger they could trust, an innocent animal that a certain type of man wouldn't be able to ignore. The crying from inside grew louder, more desperate. Time was running out. Jake checked his weapon one final time and looked at Sarah. Her eyes held the same determination he'd seen in soldiers about to storm an enemy position. She was ready. "Let's bring them home," she whispered. Together, they stepped toward the light. The warehouse exploded into chaos as Marcus kicked down the door, his Harley's engine still rumbling behind him like thunder. Sarah's scream pierced the air from somewhere in the maze of shipping containers, and every protective instinct he'd developed over decades of riding with dangerous men surged through his veins. "Federal agents, nobody move," Detective Rodriguez's voice boomed as she and her team flooded in through the rear entrance, weapons drawn. But Marcus was already moving, his leather boots pounding against the concrete as he followed Sarah's voice deeper into the labyrinth. The smell hit him first: fear, sweat, and something else, something that made his stomach clench with rage. Children's voices, whimpering and calling out in the darkness ahead. Sarah's voice again, closer now, filled with both terror and desperate hope. He rounded a corner between towering containers and found himself face to face with Vincent Carrera, the man whose photograph had been burning a hole in his jacket pocket for the past 3 days. Carrera held Sarah against him, a knife pressed to her throat. Behind them, Marcus could see the open door of a modified shipping container, and inside, God help him, at least 6 children huddled together, their faces pale and frightened in the harsh fluorescent light. "The famous Good Samaritan," Carrera sneered, his voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus couldn't place. "You should have minded your own business, biker. Should have left that stupid donkey where you found it." "Let them go," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm despite the fury building in his chest. "This is between you and me now." Carrera laughed, the sound echoing off the metal walls. "You think this is some movie? Some heroic rescue? You have no idea what you've stumbled into. These children are worth more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes." Movement caught Marcus's eye, Rodriguez and her team positioning themselves behind the containers, trying to get clear shots. But Carrera was using Sarah as a human shield, and the children were too close to risk any wild gunfire. "The note," Marcus said, taking a careful step forward. "Emma wrote it before you took her, didn't she?" Somehow she knew. "Smart little girl," Carrera admitted. "Too smart. She saw one of my men watching the playground, started asking questions. Her mother should have taught her to keep her mouth shut." Sarah's eyes met Marcus's over Carrera's shoulder, and he saw something there that made his heart skip. Not just fear, determination. She was planning something. "Where is Emma now?" Marcus demanded, taking another step. "Safe, for now. But not for long if you don't back away and let me walk out of here." Carrera pressed the knife closer to Sarah's throat, and Marcus saw a thin line of blood appear. That was when Sarah made her move. She drove her elbow back into Carrera's ribs with all the force she could muster, simultaneously dropping her weight and twisting away from the knife. Carrera stumbled, his grip loosening just enough for Marcus to close the distance between them. 20 years of bar fights and road rage incidents had taught Marcus exactly where to hit a man to drop him fast. His fist connected with Carrera's solar plexus, doubling him over, followed immediately by an uppercut that sent the trafficker crashing into the side of the container. The knife clattered across the concrete as Rodriguez and her team swarmed in, weapons trained on Carrera as Marcus helped Sarah to her feet. "The children," she gasped, blood trickling from the shallow cut on her neck. "Marcus, we have to get them out of there." But the kids were already emerging from the container, drawn by the sound of adult voices that didn't belong to their captors. 6 children, ranging in age from maybe 7 to 12, blinking in the harsh warehouse lights like they hadn't seen the sun in weeks. And there, at the back of the group, clutching a torn stuffed elephant to her chest, was a little girl with dark hair and Sarah's eyes. "Emma," Sarah whispered, and then she was running, dropping to her knees as her daughter flew into her arms. Marcus stood back, watching mother and daughter reunite, while Rodriguez's team secured Carrera and began the process of getting medical attention for the children. His hands were shaking, he realized. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him feeling strangely empty. "Thank you," Sarah said, looking up at him with tears streaming down her face. Emma clung to her mother like she would never let go again. "I don't know how to thank you." Marcus knelt down beside them, meeting Emma's frightened eyes. "You're a brave girl," he told her gently. "That note you left, that was very smart thinking." Emma nodded solemnly. "I knew something bad was going to happen. I hoped someone would find it." "Someone did," Marcus said, thinking of the gentle donkey who had started this whole chain of events. "Someone very special found it." Rodriguez appeared at his shoulder. "Marcus, we need to talk. Carrera's not the top of this organization. We've got bigger fish to catch." The warehouse door exploded inward as Marcus's Harley crashed through the rotting wood, Sarah clinging tight behind him. Gunfire erupted from the shadows, muzzle flashes lighting up the cavernous space like deadly fireflies. Marcus yanked the handlebars hard right, the bike sliding sideways across the concrete floor as bullets sparked off metal beams overhead. "There," Sarah pointed to a cluster of shipping containers at the far end of the warehouse. Small faces pressed against barred windows, pale and frightened. The missing children. Dr. Henley's voice boomed from somewhere in the darkness. "You should have stayed away, biker. Some crusades aren't worth dying for." Marcus killed the engine and rolled behind a stack of crates, Sarah tumbling off beside him. His shoulder burned where Vernon's bullet had grazed him back at the farmhouse, but adrenaline kept him moving. They'd followed the trafficking ring's trail here after finding Vernon's records, each clue Sarah's desperate search had uncovered, leading to this moment. "How many?" Marcus whispered, checking his. 45. "I counted 4 shooters plus Henley." Sarah's hands shook as she gripped the tire iron she'd grabbed from the bike. "Marcus, one of those children. I think I saw Emma. My Emma." 15 years of searching, 15 years of following false leads and dead ends, and it might finally be over. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. "We're getting them all out." A shadow moved between the containers. Marcus fired twice, rewarded with a grunt of pain. 3 left, plus the good doctor who'd been using his medical practice as a front for trafficking children across state lines. The same man who'd taken Emma from a playground in broad daylight while her mother bought ice cream from a truck 50 feet away. "You know what's funny about Crusaders?" Henley's voice echoed strangely in the vast space. "They always think they're the heroes of their own stories. But sometimes the dragon wins, Mr. Cole." Marcus frowned. He'd never told Henley his name. Movement caught his eye. Too late. Vernon stepped out from behind a pillar, very much alive despite the blood soaking his shirt. His rifle tracked towards Sarah. Marcus dove, tackling Sarah as Vernon's shot boomed through the warehouse. They hit the ground hard, rolling behind an overturned table. Wood splinters showered down as more bullets punched through their cover. "The bikes!" Sarah gasped, pointing to where 2 dirt bikes sat near a loading dock. "If we can reach them—" "No, we don't leave without those kids." Marcus's voice carried the same iron certainty that had made him legendary among the motorcycle clubs, the same resolve that had driven him to rescue an abused donkey 3 weeks ago, setting this whole chain of events in motion. That simple act of kindness had led him to Sarah's cryptic note tied to the donkey's halter, her desperate plea for help finding the daughter stolen from her so long ago. Glass crashed somewhere in the darkness. Marcus caught a glimpse of small figures moving. The children were trying to escape on their own. Smart kids, but they'd never make it past the gunman. "Cover me." He sprinted toward the containers, staying low. Vernon's rifle barked again, the bullet creasing the air beside Marcus's ear. He reached the first container and yanked at the makeshift lock. Rusty metal but sturdy. A girl's voice, thin and frightened. "Please, mister, get us out." "Working on it, sweetheart." Marcus put his shoulder to the container door. The lock snapped. 5 children huddled inside, aged maybe 6 to 12. One of them, dark hair, Sarah's eyes, had to be Emma, though 15 years had changed the toddler Sarah remembered. "Emma," he called softly. The girl looked up, hope and confusion warring in her face. "How do you know my name?" "Your mom sent me." Behind him, Sarah's tire iron clanged against metal as she fought with one of Henley's men. Marcus spun, firing at the man grappling with her. The gunman dropped, but Vernon was advancing from the other direction, reloading. "Run!" Marcus shouted to the children. "That loading dock! Get outside and keep running!" Emma grabbed the smaller children's hands, leading them out, but she paused at the container door. "The others," she said, pointing to 2 more containers. "There are more kids." Of course there were. Marcus's jaw tightened. Vernon raised his rifle, and Marcus knew he wouldn't reach cover in time. The warehouse light suddenly blazed to life. Police sirens wailed outside, growing closer. Red and blue lights flashed through the broken windows. "FBI, the building is surrounded." Henley cursed somewhere in the shadows. Vernon hesitated, his rifle wavering between Marcus and the loading dock. Sarah appeared behind Vernon like an avenging angel, bringing the tire iron down on his skull with 15 years of fury behind it. He crumpled. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Sarah with recognition dawning in her eyes. "Oh, Mom?" The word hung in the air like a prayer finally answered.